Where you from? Barbados. This will be important for you. This will be important for you to see, so you will understand how long it takes. 40 years. Let's start then. We are going to talk about not being an island, being an island, right? So to build an ecosystem, what the heck is that? You know, what do we need? What things we need to do? So first, building an ecosystem takes time and effort. We have many players on building this: academia, government, philanthropists, capital institutions, external or foreign support.
Ayuda.
Anchor tenants or anchor institutions, policy, laws, infrastructure that needs to be done. But most important thing, it's planning, and most important than the plan, you have the programs, the events that happens, and we're going to show here how long it has took us to become an entrepreneurial island, if we can call it that way. Okay, so first, there have been many economic ecosystem models. It started with the press, which was born here in Puerto Rico from Babson, and we have one of the players here who brought that the people from Babson to do this study. But since then, there have been many, and at Yes, we built our own system at that time, and it was more into the academic part, starting from K to 12. Then what was next? The PhD, 13 to PhD, and then what organizations were there playing or helping or supporting. Then the incubators and the economic institutions. So we built the same model. And what happened in Puerto Rico?
1800.
Well, I'm going to talk before you come in. Because William Lockwood, and I would like to present William Lockwood now. You can do yourself. What position you have most important in Puerto Rico?
Diablo.
Hello, good afternoon. And I also would like to move this session also to strategize about the future of our ecosystem. I started my career at the Government Development Bank for Puerto Rico, which unfortunately has closed as a result of the bankruptcy of the government. And I'm very proud for it, for that period, because I still feel that it was the elite institution in the government and also a source of innovation across many areas in economic development and capital markets. I've worked there 4 times, starting when I was 21 years old until I was 33, and then went back to serve on the board directors of some of the affiliates, to serve as president of the bank, and to serve as executive vice president and first fiscal agent later on. But my training is in technology strategy for developing countries, focusing on the countries with large multinational sectors. And I did comparative work on Ireland, Singapore, Puerto Rico, and some work on Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and how to develop their technology strategies and the formation of local businesses, and how to diversify away from multinational investment and leverage all the resources of these firms in each one of these countries. When I left the Government Development Bank for Puerto Rico in 1993, I set up my own firm, and I was invited by Arthur D. Little through a competitive RFP to compete to become part of the team working on a strategy for the capital markets of Puerto Rico. And as part of that study, we were able to estimate the amount of wealth and savings in the economy, who are the main leaders, who are the big institutional investors. And we thought it would be in the benefit of Puerto Rico at that time, because we already knew that the tax credits we had from the United States. I'm sorry, can I have your name?
Paul.
Paul. We had a very unique tax credit program provided by the U.S. from 1976 to 96 for the multinationals, where the more income you reported in Puerto Rico, the higher the tax credit you could get against the U.S. tax return. So you paid no taxes in Puerto Rico, plus you got a credit in the U.S. tax return. So that was a very unique program. It was very costly, and we were in the being overseen by the Treasury Department because the program was extremely expensive. And we knew that we needed to diversify and not rely on that program exclusively. So that program had another component, which was the retained earnings of the multinationals were flowing through the financial system, and we were flooded with low cost of capital and liquidity. But we knew that that was about to change. So we addressed the problem from the financial system perspective, and also from the deal flow and the financial intermediary perspective as well.
William, let me take a moment just to put in some context. From 1950 to 1979, Puerto Rico was starting to build its ecosystem as we know it now. Universidad of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez started giving classes in entrepreneurship. Comité Industrias de Mayagüez was the first incubator in 1950. And they were the incubator that brought in Starkist and all those companies to the West. At the same time, Hecho en Puerto Rico was born, Cámara de Comercio de Puerto Rico was born, Industriales was born, Centro Unido Detallista was born, and the government was the main entrepreneurial organization, and they were doing La Compañía de Papel, which was the paper company, cement, the company of cement, the company of shoes and glass. So the main entrepreneurial entity was the government itself. The Banco Gubernamental de Fomento was born at that time, and there was the first plan that said that Puerto Rico need to do something to change, and it was the Brookings Institute. So what happened? What was going on? What the government did in that time, also what you were saying, but what events, initiatives they were making at that time?
Well, we definitely had a very strong government-led kind of system before, with at-risk investments coming from the Economic Development Administration, which always had a pot of money. And every year, the legislature would grant around $100 million for deal making, which could go for transactions with the multinationals, or they could also go with smaller locally owned or startup companies in Puerto Rico. So we definitely had the tradition of some successes, but a lot of failures from having the government select the winners or select deal flow. And also the government was not doing structured rounds, seeing all the potential deal flow at the same time. So they wouldn't have like windows of proposals being received at certain points of the year, so they could see what the market was like. In other countries in the world, these bids for deals are even advertised in international press and and are very structured. Here we had an open door policy, which was very, led to a lot of suboptimal investments or mistakes, particularly during election years or when they wanted to a certain party to win votes in a certain part of the country, et cetera. So, but many of our colleagues worked during those years, and there's definitely a background of experience coming from that era. The Economic Development Bank was set up later on in the mid-'80s. Also, some seed venture funds in technology areas were later transferred.
That was made by the government.
Yes, yes, yes. But before that, we'd had private transactions in the past. We'd had companies going public. We had acquisitions of large companies in Puerto Rico by U.S. groups or consolidation of companies here. So that track record was mostly anecdotal and remained in the minds of some of the brokerage houses that were these underwriters for deals in Puerto Rico. They included like an airline company and certain transactions across the different industries, particularly in food and in insurance and banking, the traditional areas where the local capital is
In that same time, Industrias Navieras and Telefónica were born simultaneously, and those were governmental companies.
Right, yeah. Puerto Rico was extremely rich, as you remember, in the early decades, particularly after the Second World War, with the rum rebates coming back to Puerto Rico, and we had surpluses. So there was a mandate that if the private sector was not going to lead the opening investment areas and new activities, the state would do it. And the state had the stability, the funding, and it was able to attract the professionals to do so. During the later decades afterwards, in the 70s and 80s, it was evident that these companies were not being properly managed. So the change in focus of entrepreneurship came along with a decision to privatize these companies or close them altogether. With the sugar refineries, that was the case. With the phone company, the U.S. regulatory market was opening for competition, so it didn't make any sense to have a player that would be losing market share. So it was very clear that the company needed to be sold. And there was at that time an interest in selling the electric power company and many others as well, definitely.
So moving to the next decade, Francisco and Eduardo, can you please tell who you are, and I will talk about that decade and what happened, and then bring you on again.
Basically, my background is manufacturing to a great degree. I was general manager for 3 multinational companies here in Puerto Rico. Then I did a stint with Inteco, which is a regional economic alliance in the center of the island. And then I've done stints with Puerto Rico Manufacturers Association and a consultant.
Okay, and I have a similar background. I ran manufacturing companies in the 80s when we had 80-some computer companies operating in Puerto Rico. And after that, in 1992, I started doing consulting in 2 main areas, strategy and leadership development for executives. And I have like a 3rd career now as a hobby, and I had to say it, AI, the practical application of AI for daily activities at organizations.
Thank you. So, Victor.
No, let me go back a little bit in history. I want to go back to the 1960s. After I graduated from NYU, one of my first jobs was with the Fomento, or the Puerto Rico Economic Development Administration at that time, the Continental Operations Branch. At that time, Fomento had 8 offices throughout the United States and Canada promoting. Many of the prime industries, the ones that created the most job in New York, was the apparel industry. And many of the persons who set up contracting operations operating from Puerto Rico, tax exempt, brought their managers who were Puerto Ricans, who knew the operations of the apparel industry inside out. And several years later, many of those folks, the managers, set up their own business or became subcontractors or whatever else. So that was really a big initiative in Puerto Rico, the apparel industry, and the Puerto Ricans who had experience in marketing, production, whatever, set up operations here.
Thank you, Victor. So 1980 to 1989, Mayagüez was formally introduced the marketing, the business plan class, and they put in a entrepreneur in residence, which was Efraín Basayo. And then it started a group with Romaguera, which was the professor, Efraín Basayo, and it was not Santaliz, Ayoroa Santaliz, who started Diálogos de Autogestión, which was one type of incubator, and then now we have two incubators, one in the 50s, one in the 80s, and then it began to flourish, the ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystem. Now we have Fundación Comunitaria, we have the SBTC at that time, now SBTDC. We have COFEC, which was the first municipal bank in San Juan. We have the first incubator in the north part, which was Producir, and this was with two social entrepreneurs. So now we are starting to see what's going on. And it happened something in that time, which was Puerto Rico 2000. What was that?
It started a little bit later than that, but let me take 10 seconds, maybe 30 seconds to tell a story. I believe Puerto Rico is also a series of lost opportunities. In the 80s, we had a lot of money coming in, like Billy said, as part of the capitalization on the market, but also we're getting what they call a toll gate tax. When they took the money away from Puerto Rico, we took some percentage of it. And at the Puerto Rico Electronic Industries Association, we had the idea, we took to Fomento, and we won't say the year because they'll say who refused it.
How young you are?
Oh, all right, that's fine. We had the idea of having a R&D credit for half of the toll gate tax with no requisites. The requisite is that half of the people that work in R&D were Puerto Ricans. Even if they were the janitors, that counted, because we thought we knew how to market, we knew how to manufacture, we didn't know how to design and engineer products. And we had the money to do it. We had the organizations that were doing it world class, and we lost the opportunity to get engaged in that process. But then in '88, I don't know, Oscar was around here, I don't know if he's still around. In 1988, a group of us, led by Oscar, said, well, the competitiveness of Puerto Rico is going down the drain. And we were all working for organizations that were kind of leading manufacturing. To tell you a little bit, we're doing things that are, that they're being done still as new things. We're doing them back in the 80s, and we thought it was a good idea to propagate that experience everywhere in Puerto Rico, mainly in Puerto Rican industry. That's where Puerto Rico 2000 was born, and then you can take it from there. So I don't take the whole time, but.
Well, Puerto Rico 2000 was an organization to foment the competitiveness of Puerto Rico and become more productive. And there was a number of programs that were developed. The World Economic Forum interaction started there. Development of education, a group dedicated to education. Vision, mission, creation of a vision for Puerto Rico was created. So there was a number of groups of committees and work. One of the projects that happened in 1992, 93, and this was requested by the Puerto Rico Manufacturers Association, they asked us, well, those things that have made multinational companies in Puerto Rico become competitiveness how can you teach the Puerto Rico industry managers
Transfer knowledge.
the transfer of knowledge and transfer of a mindset? So basically, this guy and myself, we co-facilitated a team that developed the whole thing of how do you develop a quality improvement system? How do you develop teamwork? How do you develop a culture and organizational structure? How do you change the mindset of Puerto Rico managers so that they become more empowering of their people, developing their people, and then develop a work culture that basically makes you more competitive? So we put together a team, and we developed 11 modules, and we did this on working at nights, volunteers, by the way, all this was volunteer. And we put together the sequence of how do you do this? And we started developing the Puerto Rico industry modules. And this was, we would go out and talk to companies and say, okay, this is Puerto Rico local companies. You want to become part of this, you have to commit, number one, to your whole team. Your management team has to come. Number two, it's going to be on Saturdays, because we know it's on weekdays it's not going to happen. And you have to commit to the whole process. And we would actually go out and audit and ask them and visit them before doing this. So that program started, and it went for 12 years. 70 companies went through that. Two examples of two people, Maria Nieves, that was in plastics. 3 years later, she developed Alco High-Tech Plastics, which is still in operation. The Vincent, Iris and Tom Vincent, they came in and they were with their operation Best Ways. Later on, they developed Primair. Primair is still one of the premier freight forwarders in Puerto Rico, still operating and very successful. So basically, we had the opportunity of influencing the mindset of the Puerto Rico managers for 12 years with 70 companies. Eduardo and I ran that for 5 years, and then Edgar Quiñones ran it and with other people. And it was all volunteers. It's initially, you want to talk about Pritco and
Well,
their...
yeah, maybe just put another dot in the curve. The word competitividad, wasn't known. We had to explain what it was. We had to go from there. Even to the press, we talk about what Puerto Rico 2000 was about. We had to start telling them what competitiveness meant. And this was in the 90s. So, come a long way.
Going back a little to the 70s and the 80s, I worked with SBA and afterwards MBDA. Puerto Rico was very fortunate that we set up offices, the SBDCs at the time, now it's SBTDCs, and we had 3 minority business development centers at the time. They both assisted Puerto Rican entrepreneurs in accessing capital from the SBA and whatever else. So that was for me, a very important input, the federal funding for business development programs.
And in that same decade, the Junior Achievement came to Puerto Rico, and it was working with the companies so they will start educating in entrepreneurship in the schools. So now we go to the next decade, which is 1990 to 1999, and we have Laura Cantero, so you can present yourself, and then we'll talk about the decade.
And Laura was doing this in kindergarten.
Hi, Laura, excuse me, Laura Cantero from Grupo Guayacán. I think that's Jorge's decade, pero
Huh?
le metemos.
No, the thing is that Guayacán was born
Yes,
in
and
that
William-
time. I know you weren't there, but it was born there.
And William can help me with that. He alluded to it earlier. Grupo Guayacán is the nonprofit organization I proudly lead today. It was founded in the middle of that decade in 1996 as a result of one of the studies that William mentioned, which was the Arthur D. Little private capital market study. And the thesis behind Guayacan as a result of this study is that we could put to work the savings of the people of Puerto Rico towards supporting entrepreneurs in a long-term way, with a long-term view. Our founder, Ricky Azuar, truly believed that the way to achieve long-term economic development for Puerto Rico was to begin to support entrepreneurs, but that you couldn't do that without introducing local investors, at the time institutional investors, to private equity as an asset class. Investors in Puerto Rico weren't used to investing in private equity. Private equity was a fairly young market at the time. It had begun to develop in the States at the beginning of the 80s. So it had been around for a little over 10 years, but institutional investors in Puerto Rico still had no knowledge of private equity as an asset class. We're investing in Puerto Rican bonds. We know what happened to those, and obviously in the stock market. And when you talk to them about investing in private funds and private companies, it was still, and I will dare to say it still is, a foreign concept to most of them. So our founder's idea was to develop a vehicle that would introduce private equity to institutional investors in Puerto Rico, and that we could begin to talk about how that was the first step in a bigger puzzle that aimed to support entrepreneurs like Jorge, who wanted to build their companies from Puerto Rico to serve the world outside of Puerto Rico. So Guayacan's beginnings were in the private equity space. We have proudly raised 6 private equity funds in the last 28 years. Very proud to say that's over $400 million of local capital being put to work in private equity. But then, I don't know if you want me to get into this yet, Carlos, but I would say in the late 1990s or early 2000s, we began to realize that aside from the private equity piece, it was very important to do something to start supporting entrepreneurs.
We'll get there.
Okay.
So, William, at that time, does the government was doing the law for the technological part, like where the Chavito was born, and because it was 2000, you know, the year 2K was coming in. Now we have the Section 936 phase out. Was the government working on these funds for the technological part?
The Science, Technology, and Research Fund was created a bit later, at the beginning of 2000, 2001, 2002. Yes. But before that, the Fomento had R&D funds and was investing in certain technologies, of course. Yeah.
But it's also important to say, William mentioned the Government Development Bank and also the Economic Development Bank of Puerto Rico, and Guayacan is a nonprofit, and it was a nonprofit since the beginning. But really the idea of Guayacan came from those two government entities. Our founder worked in both of them, and in fact founded the venture capital office of the Economic Development Bank. And it's interesting to see, Carlos, because you mentioned different sectors coming together at the beginning. And even though he had that background, he firmly believed that Guayacan needed to be a nonprofit effort outside of the government. Because as the ecosystem began to grow, you need to bring other players to the table, right? And I think that has been key in Puerto Rico's case. We can not only depend on the government to put forth, you know, these initiatives and these policies to move it forward. So he did a couple of things there, and William was a part of our founding board, but strongly believed it needed to be outside of the government, strongly believed it needed to be a nonprofit venture so that, you know, no one's personal interests were at stake. Nonpartisan entity with a completely private board. And I have to say, fast forward 28 years, and Guayacan is now stronger than ever because of its governance structure. No matter what has happened in Puerto Rico in the last 28 years, Guayacan has had a consistent private board that has defended the interests of our organization, of our private equity funds, of our investors, and of our entrepreneurs.
On the other side, then there was Inteco forming or taking place in Caguas. I will excuse Rose. I will speak for her because we are in the same organization. And now it comes 2000 to 2009. The government is doing Porta Caribe, Porta del Sol. Inteco was born. The Sur was born. Intenor was born. Now we have seen the government taking a lot of actions. The typical organizations, you know, Centro Unido de Tallistas, Hecho en Puerto Rico, Asociación de Industriales, Cámara de Comercio, they are like, hey, we lost the 936, now we have to do something for real. And then we were born in 1999, yes, which is Youth Entrepreneurship Education System. We were three kids or three youth who were at the Chamber of Commerce. The committee of students was born, and then three people got together, which was Rosalie, Joel Maldonado, and myself, and we said that we needed to build entrepreneurship into younger ages, because now we were 20-something, maybe 30-something, and it was too late. Our youth committee in the Chamber of Commerce was not yet formed, and we were looking for younger people to join the entrepreneurship arena, and we couldn't find any, and it was very difficult for us to go into the university. So we decided to start Young Entrepreneurship Education System just to teach entrepreneurship. And it was funny because even though we started at the Chamber of Commerce, our first project was in the Asociación de Industriales, which they took it. We gave it to the sons of the industrialists the first year, and after that, it took. They said that it was so good for their sons and daughters that they amplified, and we went to the whole school district, paid from the Asociación de Industriales for 11 years, teaching entrepreneurship. We started working with Inteco in one of the projects for agricultural, for youth. So yes, was seeding the entrepreneurial, or putting the entrepreneurial seed at that time. But we were along with, and Junior Achievement was out. They were not doing entrepreneurship at that time heavily. And that was one of the main reasons that we got in, not because when we went to Junior Achievement to help them, they weren't doing anything at that time. So we started the Young Entrepreneurship Education System. And then Sila Maria Calderon started the Fundación to empower the poor people. And now we see universities starting to have the Instituto de la Mujer and many others players into the ecosystem. So after that, in 2007, I think, and Jorge could tell me if it was 2007, 2008, the Babson was coming to Puerto Rico.
That's 2009.
2009. So at the end of the decade, now we have all these players, but we were llaneros solitarios. You know, we were loners, right? And then it came in 2009, one study that changed it all for us as an ecosystem. So Jorge, can you introduce yourself while all this it's happening?
Yes, I'm Jorge Rodriguez. I'm a engineer by profession. I used to work at Eli Lilly and Johnson & Johnson. So basically, I'm a product of the 936 pharmaceuticals that were here. I went to school to University of Puerto Rico for a master in business. Pure coincidence, I didn't want to study business. And Eli Lilly paid for it. At that time, graduated 1997, the word entrepreneurship was not even mentioned anywhere in Puerto Rico that I can recall. I didn't study anything regarding entrepreneurship. I studied business. I started a business in 1997, graduated in 1996, and I provided my services to the pharmaceuticals as I was providing them as an employee. So it was basically an outsourcing. Not that we knew what that word meant, but obviously when you serve multinationals, they are all around the world, and Puerto Rico is one of the 4 clusters with Singapore, Ireland, and the US for big biopharma branded products. So we did very well, and around early 2000, 2001, 2002 is when Guayacan found me. By that time, I had like 150 engineers, and I was, traveling the world, but I had only offices here. And they kind of gave me courses, sent me to MIT for courses. And obviously my MBA runway from the University of Puerto Rico had run its course. And through those courses, I realized that I could continue expanding with the opportunities my clients were giving me. So when it came 2009, I kind of understood. I just wanted to let them know that I'm a product of 936, yes. And there has to be a connection on why all this happens. But at that time, I'm the biggest fan of entrepreneurship because obviously I did really well. I opened offices in the US, 4 offices. I opened offices in Ireland, England, moved it to Ireland, and we became a large service provider for pharmaceuticals on process automation. So it was kind of my vision, but obviously they enable the education I needed to execute that vision. In 2009, I realized that there was a lot of all over the map. And basically, thanks to Guayacan, there was a case study at Harvard written by our company, and the professor that wrote it, Dan Eisenberg, had moved to Babson. We became very good friends. So he told me, hey, I'm starting this new Babson ecosystem project, and we're looking at regions and countries about their ecosystem. And at that time I said, well, I think maybe Puerto Rico could be your first project. He said, sure. So we started, we identified 10 leading companies on each sector. So we had El Nuevo Dia, we had Popular, we had Gatsby on commercial, we had Aireco in construction. Basically 10 leading companies in their industry put half the money, and then we had government put the other half. The only reason I got government is because I needed them to open the agencies. So when your government is so large, he needs to, but it was 51% controlled by the private sector. So we ran that project for 2 years, and basically the Babson ecosystem project has 6 pillars. One pillar is basically finance, access to capital. Another pillar is culture, changing the mindset. We gave courses to the media on how to write about entrepreneurship. The other one is the collaborators, so the whole incubators and all that. The other one was education, the universities, establishing programs, educating the professors on how to write case studies. And the other one was the markets, understanding how the markets were operating, what they responded to. And the final pillar was policy. So basically through professors from Harvard and Babson, they came in, they did a lot of courses, they wrote, it's action research, so they executed things to understand how the ecosystem was set. From there, a map was created with the 6 pillars, and then they placed all the companies, all the organizations that were on each pillar. But to be frank, it was pretty healthy in many areas, and other ones was weaker. And then one of them finished the project. We couldn't continue because there was no support anymore financially. But basically, the whole idea from Babson was to create an organization that was like a choreographer. So basically, you're trying to play God. You're trying to address these pillars and see if they can do a better way than the market and the chaos by itself.
Jorge, let me excuse you for a second. There was this course that we were taking. Jorge brought in 3 cases from Harvard that was written from companies from Puerto Rico.
Yep.
And at that meeting, that guy who was, Francisco was there. The people from Guayacán were there. Francisco was the guy from Inteco, which was the municipality organization that was taking care of making an incubator in Caguas, making policy for that region. And there was the people from Guayacán, and we were sitting in the same place, 100 people there, making hearing these stories of the entrepreneurs, and I got to Francisco and I went to Guayacán and I said, look, we have to do something. And in 1 month, there is the Global Entrepreneurship Week. Nobody was knew what was that, but that was the first time that we started to celebrate entrepreneurship in that year. I think it was 2010.
2000, we finished 2010. And the last thing was that the vision was, how do you create a choreographer that is not involved in any organization, but is kind of playing the music and you know, and that's actually, I left, I went to Europe to continue the business. But then I realized Sofia was the executive director of it.
Then she opened Piloto 151.
And then the Colmena was created from the Puerto Rico Science and
before
Technology.
that, before Colmena was born, I think it was 2016. We had First Bank did the first movement for entrepreneurship. Then after that year, it came Echar Palante and started. Then we were doing the what it's called from Kaufman 1 million cups. We were doing it in Piloto with the people from Guayacán and other organizations from Centro de Emprendedores. And then it was I think it was 2016 when Colmena was born. Yep. But because there was in that study. We needed like a path. Right?
Yep. Yeah, the study had basically a plan on where Puerto Rico was at the time and what Babson was recommending to do next. So the ecosystem, by the way, Babson continues to do this in countries around the world. But basically, the ecosystem had some pieces. It just needed more coordination and trying to leverage what everyone was doing, and just trying to be more efficient. And then also what areas were empty, right? And the one area was empty is what I'm doing now with my life.
Which is?
So basically, Dan Eisenberg and Dr. Schlesinger, the president of Babson, used to come here a lot. And I remember that they told me once, you need to work with the policy. There is a pillar, the 6th pillar is policy. When they told me policy, I didn't know what it was. So basically, he said it like 3 times. He said, no one has done anything with the policy. So, you know, I left for Europe at 2011, spent a lot of years there, coming back, but mostly living there. So I got very excited when in 2015, 16, I'm back and there is a lot of stuff going on. But obviously no one was dealing with policy. So I call Eisenberg and I say, Dan, what the heck you guys mean with policy? He said, well, that's the public policy, what the legislators put together to operate. All the other pillars are dealing with individuals. There's one pillar that deals with the court where the individuals are going to play. So he said, remember the private equity law that was, the credits and all that kind of things, because as an engineer, I'm totally out of politics or policy. So I retired, wanted to do something entrepreneurship, spent 2 years asking around, and that's when the light bulb came up of the pillar of policy. And basically what I'm doing now is I have a free market think tank. So they told me the way to address policy is through think tanks that build knowledge and take it to the legislature so they can establish policy that will be healthy for where the entrepreneurs are going to operate. And the think tanks of free market are the ones that do that. There is about 60 in the United States, 1 per state plus some national. There is about 278 around the world. But Puerto Rico doesn't have any of that. So started about 2 years ago, the Puerto Rico Institute for Economic Liberty, that basically does research to produce studies and information that can be provided to the legislature for them to address our policy. Puerto Rico market is extremely highly interventionist, so the public sector barriers are significant, especially for young entrepreneurs that don't have the means. And obviously, through the think tank, you also communicate to the masses these public sector barriers that are happening. So that's kind of where we are now.
I would like for all the participants, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on the excellent point that Jorge raised. I worked for AID, and we were advocating in Latin America and the Caribbean friendly policies. That's important. But we also had to advocate for friendly agencies, the ones that implement those policies. And then last but not least, but probably even more important, friendly bureaucrats, friendly employees. And we have to address that issue in Puerto Rico. The service sometimes that is rendered to entrepreneurs is not the best, so that needs to be trained. We make 2 suggestions in that regard, because when I was with SBA, I implemented something in the district office. I was a district director in New York, and when I got there, I heard a lot about people who were applying for loans, the service. They always complained about the service. They were rude, they were this, they were that. So what I did was I implemented a review where I asked that each applicant or each person who had employee would evaluate the service that they received. They would check, was the person friendly, was the person informative, helpful, the right attitude, and you would not believe the change in the attitude of the employees when he knew that he was being evaluated, and I would look, and his manager would look at those evaluations, and those who received constantly bad evaluations, and that didn't last very long, were criticized, and those, on the other hand, those that received very high ratings received bonuses or recognitions or whatever. The second thing that helps in the attitude of the employees, believe me, and it does not cost anything. The second idea or suggestion, I worked also at the SBA in the Office of the Chief Counsel for Advocacy. I was there 4 years. One of the things that he was the first Chief Counsel Advocacy, Milton Stewart, did was for all the employees that were there in the Office of Advocacy, he initiated or introduced this program called Outturn. He says, in government, when businesses, they have these intern programs, but he wanted every employee who worked in the Office of the Chief Counsel of Advocacy to spend at least 1 week working in a business. Again, the attitude of people who had all kinds of degrees in administration, they did not know what the experience they lived there. I fortunately had the experience that I grew up working 8 or 9 years in my father's bodega in Brooklyn. And that is the tremendous experience working in a bodega, dealing with customers, dealing with suppliers. That live experience was extremely helpful to me when I went to SBA, and informed the reviewers to put themselves in the shoes of a small business person coming for a loan, and that helped a lot too. So that's something
Victor.
should be considered.
Thank you. I would like for if you have any questions, people in the table or in the back to make them now.
Carlos, I'd like to mention for Paul and Barbados, Puerto Rico ran through a system of local regional alliances where basically a number of municipalities or towns would get together, combine with academia and industry, and form nonprofits. And those entities would look at developing local regional strategies using the local resources of that region. And I think that became important for Puerto Rico, particularly a number of those regional alliances develop incubators. And they draw upon pushing entrepreneurship and development of local companies in the areas, using resources and using the capabilities, and you know, with the academia, universities involved, then it gives it that extra push. But I think the regional alliances, that not all have been totally successful, but I think they contributed to the development of entrepreneurial, and particularly the incubators.
There is another thing that it can be done. The universities in Puerto Rico didn't have this entrepreneurial mentality. In 2013, we went to the government and we asked for funding so we can do a competition between the universities. Okay, and the youth department of the government gave us $100,000, and we went to the universities and told them that there was a competition like the NCAA in sports, but it was the Justas Empresariales Universitarias. At that time, the universities didn't have this impulse of committees or entrepreneurial classes in depth. So after 4 years doing that competition for the universities, now all the universities, all of them in Puerto Rico, are doing entrepreneurial thinking, entrepreneurial classes. They are certifying all their teachers or professors. So there are events that can help all the other players to get in. And you.
Yes. Hi, Evi Collazo with the Puerto Rico Science Trust and also Proud Guayacan. I appreciate the history lesson, right? There's some gaps that I had in my knowledge of the ecosystem from the past years that I wasn't aware of, but I would love for the panelists to sort of share what your thoughts and aspirations are for the future. Where
The question.
What
What's
do you
next?
What's next? We've seen, you know, the sort of do's and don'ts, and we can take away takeaways, right? And lessons learned. But what do you hope for Puerto Rico? What do you hope for our ecosystem? What are your hopes and dreams for our entrepreneurs and for our beloved island?
Laura.
Take a crack at that. I was looking at the map since a couple minutes ago, and I was thinking to myself, someone looking at it for the first time, you might think that it's full and we've done it. So I don't want to be pessimistic, but we have a long way to go. So the first thing when I think about the future, we have to build on some of the building blocks that we've spoken about here today. I didn't really go into Guayacan's programs here today, but like Guayacan, there are many organizations like the Science Trust, like Parallel 18, like Centro para Emprendedores that are offering the entrepreneurial education to entrepreneurs at different stages of growth. I agree with Carlos that universities have come a long way, but we have yet to change the mindset of those students at the school level and at the university level, because children or young adults are still not going to school to become entrepreneurs. Jorge said earlier that he wasn't taught to be an entrepreneur. I wasn't either, and I was one of those kids who went to the right schools, got the right mentors, had all the right opportunities. And it was never a possibility in my mind. So when I joined Guayacan 11 years ago, that was one of my biggest frustrations. How come I didn't know that this was important for Puerto Rico? And so I've done my very best to channel those frustrations into actually making things happen. I think that when we think about the future, Jorge alluded to this also, but public policy is important to support the things that organizations like Guayacan want to put forth. And I think that there is something to be said about collaborations. I think that a lot of the growth in the ecosystem has happened because of organic collaborations. And it is sad to frame it in this way, but I think that all of the crises that Puerto Rico has gone through in the last maybe 10 years, or maybe more profoundly since Hurricane Maria, has forced us to think in a different way. I think that, as Carlos said, universities started to act differently, although I think that perhaps the biggest opportunity is in education. And also, the corporate sector in Puerto Rico has begun to think about what their role is in supporting the entrepreneurs. I will speak for Guayacan. We have dozens of corporate partners that work with us uninterruptedly and uninterestedly to support entrepreneurs in different stages and different sectors. And also we have longstanding partners like Banco Popular, like Liberty, like MCS, who work tirelessly with us to figure out not only what entrepreneurs need to learn, but what do entrepreneurs at different stages of growth need to succeed? Nirma texted me earlier before leaving, and she said, we just have to agree on what we want to get behind as a country, not as an ecosystem. If we are able to do that, and we are able to pick one thing that we are all going to get behind, I am sure we'll be able to make it happen.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
And I think it's even underlying what you're saying, which has been a struggle from 1984 for us. You know, what's Puerto Rico's business? But that's another argument. But I think to address entrepreneurship, if we can call it that way, one question is, what does success means? You know, if we're all successful, you know, and what does that mean? And how do you measure it? Because that's the only way you can take objectivism out of the progress and come back to stating what does it mean. And we attempted to do that in the 90s when you mentioned the World Economic Forum, and we were there like for 4 years, and you can see the progress being measured. But as many things political, they get pushed out because that also shows your weaknesses. But those are two questions that need to be addressed.
But it's funny because as we build this ecosystem for the entrepreneurs, in 1990 we had around 100,000 companies, and today we have less than 45,000 companies. So as we get this ecosystem going strong, our companies, especially local companies, are not.
But I think just quickly to sort of land the concept of success, I think that in the big scheme of things, entrepreneurs like Jorge cannot be outliers. But how do you get there? By understanding that entrepreneurs in Puerto Rico do not become entrepreneurs because it's the cool thing to do, or because we are here this week having a great conference and talking about it. Entrepreneurs in Puerto Rico, regardless of industry, regardless of stage, for the most part, become entrepreneurs because they have to put food on the table. If we are able to understand that and put forth the policies so that people can have control, of their financial freedom can have an impact on their employees and their communities. And on Puerto Rico, that's what success looks like.
Let me
Now,
give you a, I have.
Go ahead, go ahead.
One of the
follow-up
challenge,
before you change the conversations, one follow-up comment. People, organizations, and nations change because of one of two things: inspiration or desperation.
Need.
And for this last 30 years, we've said, oh, federal funds will keep us away from this desperation. And in the last few months, I've gone to bed thinking, well, maybe desperation is starting to creep in, for good or for bad.
The
'Cause
entrepreneurs,
we need the push.
the entrepreneurs we serve have not been touched by federal funding. If I had $1 for every time someone told me to take advantage of the federal funding opportunities, I could fund the endowment and continue to give programs.
But
one of the things I wanted to mention, one of our biggest challenges 10 years ago, we would say it's the public perception of entrepreneurs. Puerto Rico, because it used to be job-oriented, the public perception was that the entrepreneurs were not the way to go. It was kind of being greedy, or the perception of owning a business was not great. And that has been one of our biggest challenges, changing the public perception that becoming an entrepreneur, becoming a Jorge Rodriguez is something great, that we should encourage people and that we have to make them heroes of the economy. And we are in that, still trying to do that. We have a lot of work to be done in changing the public perception of entrepreneurship is a good thing for the country, a good thing for economic development.
At the risk of stating the obvious, one size does not fit all. When we use the term entrepreneurs, but there are different types of entrepreneurs. There's the intuitive entrepreneur. Buy low, sell high. You know, I buy at 10 and I sell at 20 and I make 10%. You know, they have no knowledge. Then besides the intuitive, then there's the informed, and then there's there's the visionary entrepreneur. And each one of them, you have to factor in the impact that they have on Puerto Rico's economy. And we have to approach this, I think, from a more holistic approach, because each of these entrepreneurs at whatever level, they have their vision or lack of vision, clarity, that has to be addressed. They may or may not have a viable plan for implementing what they're supposed to do. They may or may not have the proper mindset. That's extremely important. The perseverance, whatever. They may or may not have access or have the necessary knowledge to succeed. They may or may not have the necessary resources or access to resources, knowledge or resources, meaning money, access to technology, time, and very importantly, you can have all of the above, but if you don't have a supportive economy, a supportive environment, you're not going to get one.
Demographics.
Yeah.
Demographics.
And
without a market,
and accountability.
then you have to move someplace else. Jorge, you want to say something, and then we'll finish?
Let me start by, there's no way you can separate the norms and the rules that the entrepreneur needs to follow to execute and achieve its vision from the entrepreneur. And policy has become extremely hostile in Puerto Rico for all individuals, even the one that doesn't want to be an entrepreneur but wants to be an interior designer. Guess what? You need a license. No other state, maybe no other country has a license for interior designer. We have 13 occupational licenses that no other state has. We have 34 that 47 states or more don't have. Puerto Rico is way below on economic liberty around the world. We are in the 25th, third percentile. So we are next to the worst 25% on economic liberty in the world, and we're the worst of all of the states. In ease of doing business, we're the city number 83 out of 83 cities in the United States. So every time we measure something, we are the way at the bottom. So what I view is how does the private sector gets finally privatized and does the pushback to the government. In 2010, when I did press, there was a reason I was very naive, but there was a reason the other 9 companies didn't want to do policy because you have to deal with the government. And whether you're in cahoots with government or you don't want to deal with them, but you need the most strong, smart, organized, and responsible sector in a society, private sector, to take it to their government. We are the people, they are serving us. So somehow I view a movement, and that's what the Super PAC, Democracy is Prosperity, is trying to do, but you need a movement that goes to politics and says, what you're doing is wrong, and it's hurting our prosperity. The fundamental principle of F.A. Hayek is the engine of prosperity in society is going to be the innovation, the creativity, and the talent of the individuals. 2/3 of the value we consume is handed to us because of our territorial situation. So if in order to capture and sustain value, you need to create it first, guess what? We create 1/3 of what we capture. And that doesn't work. So that's why my passion now is to actually take it to government. As many of you may know, I have no hairs in my mouth. But I'm looking back, I would have never been able to create Passive in 1997. Today, Passive will not have existed. I mean, today is very hard and very hostile to create your dream.
Yeah.
And as many of you know, I come from a large family from immigrant parents, and I was able to provide a lot of stuff for them, and not only to contribute, but not to depend. But there's a lot of people that cannot achieve that here, and that's why you have the highest immigration of any state in the last 10 years comes from Puerto Rico, right? When I come from all my travels, I used to sit on the right-hand side of the airplane. When it comes to Puerto Rico, that's the way you see your island. And when you live outside or you love your island, you just want to see it when you're coming in. It's beautiful. And I remember when you're landing, you look at the downtown financial district, La Mina de Oro, and you see all these tall buildings, right? So, and then it lands and it claps. And I like to say that my dream, probably will not see it, but I will try to fight as much as I can to see it. And that's my vision. I think that should be the vision of Puerto Rico.
And that's a world vision.
Yeah.
So
that's why I wanted to finish with the vision is, I want to see logo. I just want to see one logo. I know if there's going to be one, that means there's a lot of others coming up. I want to see one logo of a publicly traded company from Puerto Rico that creates value in the world and that is not based on transfer of value from federal government. So that will take away banks, that will take away health companies. It will need to be a company of someone that is creating value for the world, but is Puerto Rico. And hopefully it will be the tallest building. That when people land, they get surprised that they saw a company, they may be wearing something, and that company is from Puerto Rico. We've never had one. So if we have one company creating value in the world that is publicly traded and based in Puerto Rico, hopefully the CEO will have a Twitter account, and you have others. If you achieve that, that means you created all the other type of entrepreneurships, right? So to me, that should be the hairy, audacious goal. How do we get publicly traded companies in Puerto Rico that create value in the world, not value based on federal transfers?
Laura, William, Jorge, Eduardo, Francisco, gracias. Thank you. We're finished today, but keep on doing the Global Entrepreneurship Congress through the day. Thank you.